There's more to do, but that's good work. I'm very proud of the work that we have done.
The steps that you're talking about now, why haven't you done them already? Do you still want to ban fracking?
No, and I made that clear.
You said there's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking, so yes. What made you change that position at the time?
Well, let's be clear.
In political interviews, it's the interviewer's job to act as a substitute for the skeptical viewer, which means asking the tough questions that the skeptical viewer would like to know the answers to. The interviewer's aim is not just to obtain and impart information, but more importantly, to ask the politician to account for his words and actions. Does this interview format live up to this ideal? And does Harris give proper and reliable answers? These are the questions this video will look at. If you're excited about language and how language works, subscribe for more videos. Welcome aboard.
You have less time to make your case to voters than any candidate in modern American history. The voters are really eager to hear what your plans are. If you are elected, what would you do on day one in the White House?
Well,
in political interviews, there are question prefaces and complex question prefaces, a series of statements leading up to the question itself. Complex prefaces problematize the politician's stated positions and make it difficult for the politician to answer. Here, however, the question preface makes it easy for Harris to answer, and additionally, it provides her with a possible excuse that she has little time to make her case. In order to understand Harris's subsequent answer, I need to introduce the 4 pillars of political advertising that politicians use in their speeches and interviews. The first pillar is the politician giving positive personal details to show that she's sympathetic and trustworthy, supposedly. The second pillar is the politician presenting her policies, preferably being as general, even vague as possible, so that as many people as possible will agree with her. That's why politicians frequently use slogans like hope, change, and justice that don't mean anything. The third pillar is the politician attacking her opponent rhetorically. This creates a contrast, a protagonist-antagonist narrative, which makes the politician look good. The fourth and final pillar is the politician showing that she's in sync with the values and wishes of ordinary people. This pillar is closely connected to the second pillar. In Harris's answer, the second, third, and fourth pillars are represented.
there are a number of things. I will tell you, first and foremost, one of my highest priorities is to do what we can to support and strengthen the middle class. When I look at the aspirations, the goals, the ambitions of the American people, I think that people are ready for a new way forward, in a way that generations of Americans have been fueled by hope and by optimism. I think, sadly, in the last decade, we have had in the former president someone who has really been pushing an agenda and an environment that is about diminishing the character and the strength of who we are as Americans, really dividing our nation, and I think people are ready to turn the page on that.
So what would you do day one?
To support and strengthen the middle class.
Ambiguity is the glue of politics. It allows people to agree on laws and policies because they can read different meanings into the words. This seems to be the case here, as support and strengthen the middle class, the group of voters Harris wants on her side, can mean many different things to many different people in this large group. This is the second pillar of political advertising in full effect.
Aspirations, the goals, the ambitions of the American people. I think that people are ready for a new way forward.
This is the fourth pillar, as Harris taps into the emotions and values of ordinary people, implying that she's at eye level with them and shares their values. It should be noted that she doesn't define what aspirations, goals, and ambitions she's talking about, which has to do with the intentional vagueness that's a standard part of political rhetoric. The term forward is a cliché that's designed to give people the impression that anything other than what the given politician suggests is a setback.
And we will always do more to fight climate change.
In a way that generations of Americans have been fueled by hope and by optimism.
This is national ethos, which is designed to give the impression or false impression of a sense of community across time and space. This kind of ethos appeals to emotion, which, in theory, makes it easier to persuade people. This ethos is part of constitutive rhetoric, with which the speaker constitutes an audience by, first of all, presupposing that the audience exists, and secondly, presupposing that it's the same we today as it was in the past, disregarding cultural and societal differences and developments. Thus, constitutive rhetoric has an oversimplifying function in making the speaker look like a uniter or even savior, because of course Harris has never said anything potentially divisive.
I believe this is a moment when our country is witnessing an assault on our deepest values and ideals. Homophobia and transphobia are real in this country. LGBT rights are under attack.
Thus, the divider-uniter tactic has no real meaning, as it's completely dependent on the eye of the beholder.
Diminishing the character and the strength of who we are as Americans, really dividing our nation.
This is the third pillar of political advertising, rhetorical attacks on the opponent who, because of the collective we Harris has constituted, comes across as a divider, at least in Harris's narrative. It should be noted that Harris doesn't detail who we are.
Who we are as Americans.
This lack of specificity allows people to read different meanings into the words. The oversimplifications and intentional vagueness reveal that Harris, like the vast majority of politicians, is more interested in using the right rhetoric than giving specifics. All politicians have received media training. Part of this media training is to hold the conversational floor with generic statements. Therefore, in my opinion, the response time for politicians should be less than the full minute Harris is given. However, in Harris's defense, it could be argued that the question was very broad. The question would have been more specific if the interviewer had asked, "What's the one thing you do on day one?" or something similar. Questions should be as specific as possible. When questions are specific, it's easier to see when the politician dodges them and how.
Day one, it's going to be about, one, implementing my plan for what I call an opportunity economy. I've already laid out a number of proposals in that regard, which include what we're going to do to bring down the cost of everyday goods, what we're going to do to invest in America's small businesses, what we're going to do to invest in families, for example, extending the child tax credit. There's the work that we're going to do that is about investing in the American family around affordable housing, a big issue in our country right now. So there are a number of things on day one.
Exactly, a number of things on day one. And because the interviewer hasn't specified one thing and doesn't interrupt enough, it allows Harris to make a bunch of declarations of intent as opposed to mentioning specific policies. The difference between a declaration of intent and a specific solution-oriented answer is found here.
The cost of everyday goods, what we're going to do to invest in America's small businesses.
Harris doesn't specify how she'll bring down the cost or how she'll invest, which would have been a solution-oriented answer. Politicians are interested in keeping interviews about what they'll give to people. They aren't interested in talking about where these gifts come from, that is, which other political areas the money should be taken from. It's the interviewer's job to ask these questions, which doesn't happen here.
You are well aware that right now many Americans are struggling. There's a crisis of affordability. One of your campaign themes is "We're not going back." But I wonder what you say to voters who do want to go back when it comes to the economy specifically, because their groceries were less expensive, housing was more affordable when Donald Trump was president.
Instead of asking Harris what she'll do to lower prices specifically, the interviewer introduces a new topic. They don't get to the bottom of things, which makes it easy for Harris to set the agenda. The framing of the question should always be noted. The interviewer asks what Harris will say to voters who want to go back, which makes it very easy for Harris to keep implementing the 4 pillars of political advertising and thus set the agenda. Alternatively, the interviewer could have asked, "How do you defend that housing is so bad right now?" Or, "The economy was better before and you've already had years to make it better. Why should people listen to you?" Instead, the framing of the questions is aligned with Harris's perspective. There's nothing adversarial about these questions in order to stop her from using the rhetorical tactics that are part of her media training. As a result, Harris is allowed a much too long turn of talk that's full of declarations of intent. She starts with pathos, appealing to people's emotion and pity. Let's watch.
Well, let's start with the fact that when Joe Biden and I came in office, during the height of a pandemic, we saw over 10 million jobs were lost. Literally, we were all tracking the numbers. Hundreds of people a day were dying because of COVID. The economy had crashed. In large part, all of that because of mismanagement by Donald Trump of that crisis. When we came in, our highest priority was to do what we could to rescue America. And today, we know that we have inflation at under 3%. A lot of our policies have led to the reality that America recovered faster than any wealthy nation around the world. But you are right. Prices, in particular for groceries, are still too high. The American people know it, I know it. Which is why my agenda includes what we need to do to bring down the price of groceries. For example, dealing with an issue like price gouging. What we need to do to extend the child tax credit to help young families be able to take care of their children in their most formative years. What we need to do to bring down the cost of housing. My proposal includes what would be a tax credit of $25,000 for first-time home buyers, so they can just have enough to put a down payment on a home, which is part of the American dream and their aspiration, but do it in a way that allows them to actually get on the path to achieving that goal and that dream.
So you have been vice president for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
It takes Harris 1 minute and 10 seconds to get to a specific proposal. Harris highlights the gift aspect of this proposal, but unsurprisingly, she doesn't mention the cost aspect, where the money comes from or should be taken from, because in politics, nothing's free, nothing's a gift. In that regard, Harris does what most politicians would do in a similar situation, so the real problem lies with the interview format so far. Instead of trying to cover many different issues, it's a lot more enlightening if the interviewer focuses on a few issues and asks the politician to account for those, with as many interruptions and repetitions of the questions as it takes to get a specific answer. Unfortunately, this format encourages politicians to make speeches and not engage in an actual dialogue.
Well, let's start with the fact that
This is the beginning of a roundabout answer, with which speakers indicate or make it look like they'll get around to the real answer eventually. Well is a discourse marker which foreshadows upcoming modifications or disagreement. Because the interviewer's question is favorable of the person Harris had portrayed as the antagonist, Harris needs this roundabout answer for self-protective reasons, and with "let's," she makes it sound like a collaborative effort, encouraging the interviewer not to interrupt her.
in large part, all of that because of mismanagement by Donald Trump.
In large part is a hedge, equivocation, words that express uncertainty rather than certainty. With this word choice, Harris herself indicates that it wasn't solely due to mismanagement, which raises the question, does she even know how much, or is she just saying this to shift blame in accordance with the third pillar of political advertising? Because what's interesting is that Harris isn't willing to use the same emotional excuse for Trump as she uses for herself, because according to the logic she herself applies, it could be argued that Trump was also a victim of the very same crisis.
Of that crisis. A lot of our policies have led to the reality that America recovered faster than any wealthy nation around the world.
Harris doesn't give causal relations between specific policies and recovering faster. Instead, she simply says a lot, which is so vague that it might as well have been the policies of the previous government that helped America recover fast, depending on how you even define recovering in the first place.
But you are right. Prices, in particular for groceries, are still too high.
It took 40 seconds for Harris to get to this acknowledgement of the interviewer's question. And as previously mentioned, this acknowledgement comes in form of declarations of intent and one proposal that the interviewer doesn't ask Harris to account for. So far, practically anyone could have done what Harris does. Reciting pre-prepared statements isn't difficult.
You have been vice president for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
The steps that you're talking about now, why haven't you done them already?
That's the type of question that's needed, no matter who's being interviewed. Next, notice Harris's stalling answer as a result of this more confrontational question, starting with the term initial delay, which indicates that the question interferes with the recitation of pre-prepared statements.
Why haven't you done them already?
Well, first of all, we had to recover as an economy, and we have done that. I'm very proud of the work that we have done that has brought inflation down to less than 3%.
So she keeps repeating. Could we get an actual answer to this question?
The work that we have done to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors. Donald Trump said he was going to do a number of things, including allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Never happened.
Harris wasn't asked about Trump, so a passage like this shows how much politicians prioritize rhetorical tactics, in this case blame shifting as a diversion tactic. Politicians are so caught up in the 4 pillars of advertising that they don't engage in a dialogue, and most certainly don't admit to any wrongdoing.
We did it.
Harris was asked why she hadn't already done the steps she was proposing, but here she goes straight to presupposing what they allegedly did, and that's without even specifying how.
So now, as I travel in the state of Georgia and around our country, the number of seniors that have benefited, I was in Nevada recently, a grandmother who showed me her receipts. And before we capped the cost of insulin for seniors at $35 a month, she was paying hundreds of dollars, up to thousands of dollars a month for her insulin.
This is called a synecdoche, which is a small part of an issue or problem that's used to represent the whole, even though it doesn't necessarily follow that just because one grandmother's receipts allegedly look good, Harris and Biden's policies have been beneficial. It's always possible to find someone who benefits from almost any policy. It doesn't mean anything. People don't know anything about this grandmother or her circumstances. Thus, synecdoches have an oversimplifying function, and they're always intended to make the politician look like one of the people.
She's not doing that any
You
longer.
maintain Bidenomics is a success.
Yes, because that's the question we need right now. Originally, the interviewer asked Harris to explain why she hadn't already done the steps she proposed, and then Harris started to list the things she's supposedly done, and confusingly, they've gone from talking about housing to medication. Thus, Harris hasn't answered the question properly, but instead of pointing this out, the interviewer's busy feeding Harris with topics that are easy for Harris to make speeches about, and Harris doesn't waste the opportunity that CNN so generously gives her.
I maintain that when we do the work of bringing down prescription medication for the American people, including capping the cost of the annual cost of prescription medication for seniors at $2,000, when we do what we did in the first year of being in office to extend the child tax credit so that we cut child poverty in America by over 50%, when we do what we have done to invest in the American people and bringing manufacturing back to the United States so that we created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs, bringing business back to America, I'll say that that's good work. There's more to do, but that's good work.
In political rhetoric, numbers are frequently used to give the impression that complex and ambiguous issues are simple, countable, and precisely defined. And the issues here are indeed more complex and ambiguous than Harris lets on. Where did and does the money come from? How does she define poverty? Where do these statistics come from? Who did the research? Which businesses is she talking about? Etc., etc. Politicians almost never mention the independent variables that are associated with all studies and surveys. It's the interviewer's job to ask the politician about these things. Otherwise, the politician will jump from one area to the next with their many blanket statements. The supposed work that Harris and her colleagues have done isn't the same as talking about why the necessary steps haven't already been done. If the steps had been done, there'd be nothing to propose, which is what Harris did initially.
My proposal includes what would be a tax credit of $25,000 for first-time home buyers.
The interviewer should have noticed this, and unfortunately, maybe she did. In the current media landscape with extremely partisan media, it wouldn't surprise me.
I'll say that that's good work. There's more to do.
Yes, and Harris should have spent this time talking about what she'll do that she hasn't already done. Instead, she's listed a bunch of unrelated alleged achievements. Politicians are only as evasive as the interviewer lets them.
When you were in Congress, you supported the Green New Deal. And in 2019, you said, quote, "There is no question I'm in favor of banning fracking." Fracking, as you know, is a pretty big issue, particularly in your must-win state of Pennsylvania.
Sure.
Do you still want to ban fracking?
No, and I made that clear on the debate stage in 2020, that I would not ban fracking. As vice president, I did not ban fracking. As president, I will not ban fracking.
That's it, really. Harris doesn't think she needs to clarify what made her change her mind. Her intonation lets the interviewer know that she doesn't want to dwell on this question.
No.
Thus, Harris herself reveals that this is a sensitive issue.
In 2019, I believe, in a town hall, you said you were asked, would you commit to implementing a federal ban on fracking on your first day in office? And you said, there's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So yes. So it changed in that campaign?
In 2020, I made very clear where I stand. We are in 2024, and I've not changed that position, nor will I going forward. I kept my word, and I will keep my word.
This can't be real, can it? She's literally changed her position, but makes it sound like she hasn't. The interviewer brought up 2019, not 2020, as Harris modifies it, in order to set the agenda. Next, notice Harris is stalling.
What made you change that position at the time?
Well, let's be clear. My values have not changed. I believe it is very important that we take seriously what we must do to guard against what is a clear crisis in terms of the climate. And to do that, we can do what we have accomplished thus far. The Inflation Reduction Act, what we have done to invest, by my calculation, over probably $1 trillion over the next 10 years, investing in a clean energy economy. What we've already done, creating over 300,000 new clean energy jobs. That tells me, from my experience as vice president, we can do it without banning fracking. In fact, Dana, I cast the tie-breaking vote that actually increased leases for fracking as vice president. So I'm very clear about where I stand.
The fact that Harris gets away with this openly evasive answer for 50 seconds is unheard of. It reminds me of the bought and paid for journalists working for the so-called public service media institution in my country that people are forced to fund via taxes.
Well, let's be clear.
Yes, because that's what everyone who truly wants to be clear feels the need to say, especially when they've tried not to be clear.
My values have not changed.
No one's talking about values. This is focus shift. For once, she was asked a specific question about a specific contradiction, and ironically, by evading the direct answer, Harris keeps affirming that she knows that this issue doesn't make her look good.
I believe it is very important that we take seriously what we must do to...
With the collective personal pronoun we, she associates with other people, giving the false impression that this is a shared problem, when this is really about her not wanting to say that she's changed her mind and why.
So I'm very clear about where I stand.
The only reason for saying this is because she knows she hasn't been clear and isn't being clear, because she keeps dodging the direct answer. In spite of this, the interviewer makes it easier for Harris, not harder. But before watching the next excerpt, I think this little exchange exposes CNN and so many other media institutions for what they are, allies.
I cast the tie-breaking vote that actually increased leases for fracking as vice president. So I'm very...
She agrees with Harris when she should have asked why Harris doesn't answer directly.
Was there some policy or scientific data that you saw that you said, oh, okay, I get it now?
Now, she doesn't even ask what made Harris change her position, a presupposition question. But if there was anything that made her say, I get it now, which isn't the same as saying change position at all. Now, it's a softball yes-no question that presupposes that Harris is right in not wanting to ban fracking.
Oh, okay, I get it now.
We can't have an interview between allies become too hostile after all.
That you said, oh, okay, I get it now.
What I have seen is that we can grow and we can increase a thriving clean energy economy without banning fracking.
Okay.
Based on what, though? The kind of claim Harris makes must necessarily be based on a policy or scientific data. Otherwise, it isn't based on anything. So once again, this is evasive and unreliable. Harris reuses the interviewer's words.
Was there some policy or scientific data that you saw that
What I have seen is that
Lexical reuse, as it's called, makes it look like the politicians being properly responsive to the issues that the question raises, but with her lack of grounds, not to mention backing, Harris isn't being properly responsive because she isn't making an actual argument. The only thing that seems to matter to her is using the right catchphrases.
it's a thriving clean energy economy.
What do you think about this interview? Let us know in the comments. See you next time.